Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy. We have been discussing important topics for mains examination. So, since last few classes, we have discussed polity important topics. From today onwards, we'll be discussing some more important topics from science and technology. So, when we talk about science and technology, first of all, we need to look into the syllabus. Right, so in general studies paper 3 different aspects have been different topics have been covered as part of the syllabus. For example, if you look at the syllabus, science and technology, recent developments in the field of science and technology and the applications of those developments and their effects on daily life. So this is how this has been given. For example, imagine that ISRO's space program or Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, any new innovation in the areas of nanotechnology, innovation in the areas of genetic engineering, biotechnology. So all these different science fields are very, very important, right? So from space, number of questions are asked. And from space itself, for example, in UPSC, Chandrayaan is being asked, Chandrayaan 3 is asked. Similarly, apart from Chandrayaan, Gaganyaan is also very, very important. India's first manned space mission. And similarly, there may be questions on PSLV, Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, and even GSLV also. And overall, India's space program may be asked. And apart from that, there are also questions from the area of defense. For example, ES-400 missile defense systems have been asked, and integrated guided missile development program was also asked, right? So all these are very, very important topics. And you should also understand the developments in the area of science and technology. For example, when I say developments, GM crops. What are the applications of GM crops? And how GM crops would further enhance farmers' income? So that is also a very, very important aspect, right? So we have to understand this. So the applications of GM crops, along with the applications of GM crops, so how it increases income of farmers, and what are the environmental concerns that these GM crops have, and what are the regulations that the government has actually made. And apart from that, we should also, for example, nanotechnology. Similarly, electric vehicles. So all these are important developments, because all these different scientific developments have their own applications. And in daily life also they have certain advantages and utilities, and therefore all these are a very, very important science topics that you have to keep in mind. Particularly, you need to focus on technology, which is essentially indigenization of technology, or the domestic technology, development of the domestic technology. So instead of depending on the technologies of other countries, we have dependent on the technologies of our own country. They are made in India. Innovation, research, everything takes place in India. Domestic components have been used. So that sort of a technology is known as indigenous technology. So what are the achievements so far we have made in the field of science and technology, particularly with respect to indigenization of technology and also developing new technologies? If there are any efforts made for the development of new technologies, so that should also be discussed here, and that is very, very important. And similarly, in UPSC syllabus, it is talking about information technology, space, another very important domain, computers. So when we talk about the computers, In recent times, together IT and computers together, then a number of areas, for example, Internet of Things, big data, artificial intelligence, and robotics. So all these are the emerging areas. So virtual reality and augmented reality. So these are the emerging areas that we should focus on. And similarly, the cybersecurity threats that we have been facing. So these are the emerging areas that one should focus on. And apart from that, the Industrial Revolution 4.0. So Industrial Revolution 4.0 is also another major area. So we already talked about nanotechnology. So what are the applications of nanotechnology? What is India's national nanotechnology mission? So biotechnology, genetic engineering, and issues related to the intellectual property rights and intellectual property rights policy that we have framed in the year 2016. So all these areas are very, very important for your examination. So what we will do over a period of time, we are going to discuss all these important topics so that you will be adequately equipped with all these content for all these topics, and you should also understand the basic aspects related to the important topics that are given here. So first of all, we'll be starting this discussion with a space technology. So we'll understand what exactly space technology and what are when ISRO was established, what is the mission and vision of the ISRO, and what are the successful missions, and how ISRO has been contributing for the economic development, social development, and increasing India's soft power at the international level, increasing private sector presence. So all these aspects we'll be understanding in a very detailed manner. And first of all, so whenever you get any question with respect to space technology, it is always recommended to mention some important and relevant data with respect to space technology. So for example, according to the World Economic Forum, right, a recent report that was released by the World Economic Forum has suggested that the global space economy will actually reach a value of 1.8 trillion. So it will reach a value of 1.8 trillion by the year 2035. Right, so this essentially means that the global space economy has been rapidly increasing, and Indian space economy or India's space economy is also contributing rapidly to the global space economy. And in fact, it is estimated that the rise of the space economy, the world space economy, is equivalent to the semiconductor industry. Right, so by this you can understand so what is the potential of the space economy and how the space economy has been growing at a much faster pace. Now firstly, try to understand what exactly is space economy, and then we'll understand some important data with respect to the space technology. In fact, so when we talk about the space economy, it has been defined by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Now, so for example, if you get any question on space economy, you can just mention the definition of the space economy that has been given by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So in fact, as per the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the space economy actually includes a set of activities, right? And a set of activities, so it includes a set of activities plus use of resources and a set of activities to create a certain value, and also create certain benefits, value and benefits for whom? So value and benefits for the human beings in the course of exploring, understanding, researching, and managing, and even utilizing the space. So this is how OECD has actually defined the space economy. So space economy is a set of activities and also the use of resources, and these activities and use of resources creates what? They create a certain value and benefits. So the value and benefits are created for whom? They are created for the human beings, for the exploring, managing, utilizing, and understanding the outer space, right? So this is what is called as the space economy. So on this image you can clearly see the potential of the global space economy, right? The future potential of the global space economy. So by 2035 the global space economy's total value would be 800 billion. So that is estimated value, and by 2047 so it would be 1.5 trillion. So 1.5 trillion, right? So see, the data would vary because different organizations would give different estimates about the rise of the space economy. For example, here World Economic Forum says that by 2035 itself the global space economy would reach 1.8 trillion dollars. But on the other hand, some other organizations have been saying that by 2047 the global space economy would reach to 1.5 trillion dollars. So whenever you mention any such data, it would be advisable to mention the organization which has given such data, right? So that will further legitimize your answer. And in fact, India has launched its space policy in the year 2022. So India's space policy, so the size of India's space economy is $5 billion. And in fact, so India's contribution to the global space economy is just 3% only, right? So in overall global space economy, India's contribution is only 3%, and India should further increase its contribution to the global space economy, and over 10% estimated contribution, and in fact 10% by the year 2030. So this would further increase to 10% by the year 2030. So it is just an estimated value, and Indian space economy has been growing at a 48% year on year, right? So this is some data, and when you are writing answer, so you just have try to code this data in your answers, because that would further legitimize your answer, that would further enrich your answer. Now you can also see some more data with respect to India's space potential, India's space presence, India's space contribution. And in fact, we have just discussed that 3% of the global space economy, that India's contribution as per the Indian space policy. So Indian space policy says that so India has been contributing to 3% of the global space economy, and in fact India's potential would be $44 billion by the year 2033. So as of now we have just discussed that India's space economy is 5 billion, but by 2033 so India's space economy would reach to 44 billion, and it would capture near about 10 to 8% of the global space economy, right? So global space economy, or India would contribute to near about 8 to 10% of the global space economy. So this indicating that India has been growing at a robust pace, right? India's space economy has been registering a good growth rate. And in fact, India's space economy is valued at what? $8.4 billion, with downstream services accounting for 80% dominated by the private sector, and the average annual growth rate of 8% CAGR, and space startups increased from 1 in 2014 to 189 in the year 2023, with in fact with an investment of 127 million, right? So with an investment of 127 million, total number of Indian space startups is 189 space startups that we have. And in fact, the private the private space sector or private sector involvement in space is also further increasing in recent times, because the private sector has been engaged in satellite based communication solutions, testing facilities and local manufacturing as well. So satellite launches, when we talk about the satellite launches, ISRO has witnessed surge in launches with over 90% launched in the last 9 years. So we have a 90% increase in the overall satellite launches, so thereby earning around 174 million from the foreign satellite launches. So this data is very important data, and you can mention this data in your answers to make it more and more attractive, to make your answer more and more attractive. And you can also see the major milestones that ISRO has achieved so far. So you can also remember the major milestone. For example, 2023 we have successfully landed on the southern pole of the moon, and in fact India became the first country to successfully land a spacecraft on moon's surface, or I can say that a rover on the southern pole of moon. And in fact India became the first country to successfully land a rover on the southern pole of moon. And in 2019 we have launched Chandrayaan 2, and in 2017 we have launched 104 satellites in one single mission. So all these are important milestones that Indian Space Research Organization has achieved so far. And now we have just discussed that India's space sector is growing at a rapid pace, and in future also, so Indian space sector would have a bright future prospects. Now, in fact, what are the reasons for the growth of Indian space industry? So there are set of reasons, and those reasons are responsible for the growth of Indian space industry. For example, if you compare the cost of launching these missions by ISRO and other space faring countries, for example America's NASA, so ISRO's missions are cost effective in nature. What does it mean when I say cost effective in nature? For example, ISRO is just charging $15 million for launching 104 satellites in one single go in the year 2017. But on the other hand, SpaceX has been charging around 60 million for a single satellite launch. So you can imagine that for 104 satellites, so ISRO is charging just 15 million. So ISRO is charged only 15 million for 104 satellites. But on the other hand, US based private space firms like SpaceX have been charging around 60 million for one single satellite launch. So by this we can conclude that ISRO or India's space program is cost effective in nature, and that has been proved even in Mars orbiter missions and even Chandrayaan 1 to Chandrayaan 3 missions. So hence it is proved that India's space launches are cost effective in nature. So since India's satellite launching program is the most successful program and it is also cost effective in nature, so that means it would attract a lot of investments, and it would also attract more and more satellite launching offers from other countries, private companies. And in fact, ISRO time and again has proven its capability when it comes to launching satellites successfully into space. So ISRO has proved its capability. That means, so ISRO has already demonstrated its ability to launch satellites into different orbits. For example, the polar orbit, sun synchronous orbits, and geostationary orbits. So these are the different orbits around the planet Earth, and each satellite needs to be launched into these many different types of orbits, right? So therefore ISRO, through its polar satellite launch vehicle and geosynchronous satellite launch vehicle, this has been used for communication satellites. This is actually being used for communication satellites, and PSLV is also known as the workhorse of ISRO. It is being used for the remote sensing, launching remote sensing satellites. So ISRO has time and again proved its ability to launch satellites into different orbits, and ISRO is indeed successful in launching satellites into all these different orbits. And similarly, we should also talk about the credibility of ISRO when it comes to launching satellites. So it is not just about launching satellites, so it is also about the planetary missions as well. So planetary missions, so far we carried out only one single planetary mission to Mars, right? So planetary mission to Mars, and it is also known as Mangalyaan, or the Mars Orbiter mission. And in fact, India became the first country to successfully launch a mission to Mars, right? So this is also known as Mangalyaan, and it is very cost effective. And similarly, we have also launched Chandrayaan mission to moon, 3 Chandrayaan missions to moon, and Aditya L1 mission. We are also successful in Aditya L1 mission. So this mission aimed at studying the outer layer of the sun, right? So therefore, don't you think that we have that credibility of launching missions successfully, and we are even competing with the top space agencies in the world, whether it is Roscosmos of Russia and NASA of US and European Space Agency, and even Chinese Space Agency. We are actively competing with all different space agency, and we have earned that credibility, and ISRO is actually having a success rate of more than 90%. So this is enough to earn the credibility of the world when it comes to ISRO's successful track record. And similarly, ISRO has also been actively collaborating when it comes to further enriching its capabilities. For example, ISRO has been supporting the development of space capabilities and also applications in other countries, mostly in the developing countries. So one example that you can actually mention here is that the SARC satellite, so that has been launched by ISRO. So SARC satellite has been launched by ISRO. So in fact, ISRO is actively collaborating with most of the developing countries, and it has been providing training, consultancy, and even the technical assistance to the different countries. So therefore, this collaboration would also further enrich India's influence, India's soft power, and India's goodwill in all these different countries. And ISRO is also actively supporting the private space sector as well. For example, if we wanted to make the space sector more and more cost effective, and if we wanted to bring in more research, more innovation into our existing space, it is very important that we should actually tap the private sector potential, in space. And that is very, very important, because the private sector is actually having a huge potential in the area of space. For example, in India we have the private space firms like Skyroot, right? So they are successful private space firms, and ISRO has been actively encouraging the participation of different private players, and even new startups are also emerging in the private space firm. So therefore, all these aspects would further strengthen India's credibility when it comes to the major space-faring nation. And as part of the policy reforms within the area of space, foreign direct investment cap has also been increased. So recently, Ministry of Finance, what it has done, so it has notified rules under the Foreign Exchange Management Act or FEMA Act, and under this amended rules, 100% FDI has been allowed into the space sector. So therefore, 100% FDI is allowed into the space sector, and that is another major policy reform into the space sector, because keeping in mind India's huge potential when it comes to making Indian space industry more and more attractive for the foreign direct investment, the rules are also further liberalized. However, there are certain challenges, so it is very important for us to know what are the challenges in the development of the space economy. So there are certain challenges that we should focus on. For example, in India, we are lacking the regulatory ecosystem for startups. Okay, so startups, establishing startups in space sector is good for the space economy, is good for the space industry, because it would result in a healthy competition, and private sector presence means more innovation, more research, and they are also free from the government control, and they would have talented workforce, and they are also having the required amount of finances as well. So because of the global competitiveness when it comes to launching satellites, so encouraging the establishment of more and more startups would actually benefit the space economy, Indian space industry. But the problem is that there is a lack of regulatory ecosystem. So regulatory ecosystem is also very important, but there is no clarity on this regulatory ecosystem, and that has been hindering the effective development of the private space startups, right? So that has been hindering the development of the private space startups. And even so, if you look at India's space sector contribution to the global space sector contribution, so it is near about 3 to 2%, hardly near about 3 to 2%. So it is a very minimal, right? Because as of now, European Space Agency and Japanese Space Agency JAXA and NASA of USA and even Roscosmos of Russia and even Chinese space agencies, so they are having a huge domination, and even countries like UAE's space agencies are also actively competing with space agencies like India's ISRO. So therefore, in this context, India's total contribution to the global space economy is just 3 to 2%, and this number has to be substantially increased. So in order to do so, India must collaborate with the other like-minded countries. For example, with respect to the Gaganyaan program, so India has collaborated with France, India has collaborated with Russia, and USA has also provided certain assistance for India. So therefore, active collaboration with other like-minded countries would certainly benefit India's further enhancing or enriching India's total contribution to the global space economy or global space market. And even brain drain is also the other major problem that we very often see when it comes to India's space sector or space economy, because in NASA also, most of the scientists who are working in NASA are also Indian origin scientists. So therefore, if you can mention any relevant data regarding this, so that would further enrich your answer. But brain drain is a problem that we actually observe, because India actually faces a talent drain in its space sector, because leading minds see better opportunities. So they are being provided better opportunities and supportive environment in organizations like NASA and European space agencies. And similarly, it is well known fact that there is a lack of skilled workforce. Now in general, if we talk about the skilled workforce in India, we have just a 5% of formally skilled workforce out of the total workforce, and this is very less for a country like India. So despite efforts by the governments like Skill India program and National Skill Development Corporation, so all these different measures have been undertaken by the government, but despite, we are still lagging behind when it comes to having the skilled manpower, particularly in the space sector, and that is also another very big factor that has been impacting the overall space sector. Because when we have a skilled workforce, then Indian space products or Indian private space startups would become more and more globally competitive, and that would over a period of time would benefit Indian space economy or space sector. So therefore, India needs to work on producing more aerospace engineers and astrophysics and rocket science. So these should be the courses that the Indian educational institutions should offer, and they should also have the state of the art and world class facilities and infrastructure. So that's how we can actually produce the skilled and quality workforce, and that would cater to the India's growing space economy. And apart from that, there is an absence of linkage between academia and industry. So this is not just limited to the space economy, but a number of areas, for example biotechnology, genetic engineering. So all these different areas, there is a clear absence of linkage between the academia and industry. So therefore, there is a need to bridge the gap, right? So there is a need to bridge the gap between the current education and industry needs as well. So that actually plays a very, very important role, and that would also help understand the needs of the space industry, and accordingly the academia will align itself with the needs of the industry. And lower budgetary allocations is also another major problem that we have been facing. For example, compared to the countries like US and China, India's space budget is significantly smaller. So it is very, very less in India, the space budget that we actually offer in India. So therefore, these aspects should be kept in mind when it comes to further enriching India's space economy, India's space sector, making it more and more globally competitive. However, the government as of now has undertaken certain measures, certain initiatives. So those initiatives or measures are essentially aimed at giving a sustained push or boost to the space economy. For example, we have just discussed that Ministry of Finance has amended the Foreign Exchange Management Act to allow 100% FDI into the space sector. So that would attract more and more foreign direct investment into the space arena. And we also have 2023 Indian space policy has been framed. So in the year 2023, Indian space policy has been framed, and this space policy has certain it has established certain organizations which are responsible for implementing this policy. So we'll be discussing about that, right? So we'll also be discussing about the Indian space policy, and it has also certain provisions for the private space startups, certain regulations, so all those things. And even in new Space India Limited has been established for technology transfer, for the purpose of technology transfer and for the purpose of a greater collaboration with the private space firms. New Space India Limited has been established, and even Indian Space Association has also been formed in recent times. And apart from that, the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center has also been established as a single window agency, and this is a single window agency between between the ISRO and the private space firms. So these are the important initiatives that are undertaken by the government when it comes to giving a sustained push to the space industry. What are those measures? 100% FDI in space sector, and Indian space policy that has been framed in the year 2023, and Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center has been established, and this will be a single window agency between ISRO and the private space agencies, and whatever technologies that ISRO has developed, so in order to transfer those technologies to the private space firms, New Space India Limited has been established, and even the Indian Space Association is also established. So these are certain measures that have been undertaken. So what should be the way forward? What should be the appropriate way forward in this context? So it is also important for us to understand and discuss the way forward as well. So there is a need to create an enabling ecosystem. Right, so what is an enabling ecosystem? So there should be a proper culture, a culture of incubators. So the proper culture that could actually constitute incubators and venture capitalist to meet the needs of financing investment. So venture capitalist and also the inventors. So in developed countries, particularly developed countries, when it comes to the private space firms, you can actually observe a culture of incubators, a culture of venture capitalists, a culture of innovators, inventors, researchers. So in most of the US and European Union countries, you could observe this. So therefore India should also have a similar culture, and that would promote the development of private space firms. That would promote the development of the private space firms. So therefore first thing is that we should have an ecosystem, we should have a culture. And even lack of regulations is also the major problem, right? So we just have discussed that when it comes to the startups, when it comes to the private startups, we are lacking the necessary regulations. So therefore formulation of regulations in emerging areas, so this is also very, very important. So therefore there will be more clarity for the private space firms when it comes to their operations, when it comes to their operational efficiency, right? So the space industry is constantly evolving with new areas like space tourism and asteroid mining that we have just seen. Asteroid Bennu was mined by the NASA's OSIRIS-REx. So therefore there should be a robust global regulations on emerging areas, right? So space tourism and asteroid mining. So in all these different areas there should be global regulations. So these global regulations are required to fully harness the potential of the space sector. But here the problem is that there is an absence of the global regulations, and even there is a need for integrating space into the national cybersecurity strategy. For example, aligning it with the national cybersecurity strategy, national security strategy, and even bolster offensive and defensive capabilities, right? Because this is also an emerging front, and there is a need to work on this different arena as well, right? So even countries have been thinking about creating national space force as well. For example, US, China have been thinking about creating national space force as well because of emerging cybersecurity threats, and integrating the arena of space into the cybersecurity strategy is also very, very important for countries like India, because India is one of the country which has seen a number of cyber attacks on India's infrastructure, on different aspects. So therefore this is another area that we should actually work on. And there is also a need to increase space budget as well, right? there is a need to increase space budget, because see, as of now we are just spending 0.04 percentage of our GDP on the space, right? So therefore this number must be increased to around 0.5% to 1% of the GDP. Now when it comes to Chinese Space Agency and America Space Agency, NASA and European Space Agency, so India's space agency or India's space program is spending much lower. So therefore there is a need for a substantial increase in the budgetary allocation for India's space program, and in fact there is a need to create Indian Space Resilience Agency, right? So this India's Space Resilience Agency has to be created. For example, so one thing that we should understand is that there is an increasing threat and increasing global competitiveness, and there are geopolitics which are coming into play, and geoeconomics are also involved. So in order to deal with all these things, there is a need to establish Indian Space Resilience Agency, right? So must enhance space supply chain resilience, right? So this agency should be equipped with further enhancing the resilience of Indian space sector within the Quad's space cooperation, right? So I hope you knew what exactly is Quad. So Quad is a group of 4 countries in the Indo-Pacific, right? Quadrilateral security dialogue between Australia, India, Japan and USA. So essentially aimed at further strengthening resilience of India's space sector. And similarly, involvement of private sector is also very important aspect. Private sector's involvement is also very important, and there is a need to incentivize the startups as well, right? So India should actually open doors for private sectors and incentivize the space startups, mirroring its satellite launch program success with a conducive regulatory and tax environment, right? So this way forward you could actually write in your answer. And apart from that, we have a set of private space companies in India. So what are those private space companies? For example, we have just discussed about the Skyroot Aerospace. So Skyroot Aerospace is a private space firm, and it has developed Vikram S, that is a small satellite launch vehicle. It has been scheduled, so it has already launched its small satellite launch vehicle. So it has actually tested this. And even Dhruva Space, so this is also another private space company in India. So this Dhruva Space is specialized in nano satellites, micro satellites, with a multiple launches already accomplished and a more planned, right? So similarly, Agnikul Cosmos. So Agnikul Cosmos is also another private space company, so that is based in India. So it actually builds a dedicated, fully customizable, transportable launch vehicles for small satellites to launch low Earth orbit satellites called Agniban. And you might have heard about this Agniban, and that has been developed by Agnikul Cosmos. And similarly, OneWeb. So OneWeb is building a global satellite broadband constellation with over 400 satellites launched and completion slated for 2023. So these are 4 very important private space companies. Now remember, if you are asked any answer on private sector presence in India's space economy, India's space sector, so you must mention these different space firms, private space firms. So that's how you could actually enrich your answer, and that's how you can actually score good marks, and that's how you can actually differentiate your answer with the answers of other students, right? So these are private space companies: Skyroot Aerospace, Dhruva Space, Agnikul Cosmos and OneWeb. Now what is the significance of private sector participation, right? So it actually has a certain significance, and that's why we have been emphasizing on the importance of private space sector's participation. So what exactly the importance of it? For example, we have just discussed that they involve in more and more innovation, and that would result in more and more competition among the private space firms. And in fact, there will be an active collaboration between ISRO and private space firms, and between the private space firms, and this collaboration would benefit all these different space firms. For example, when we talk about the collaboration between ISRO and private space firms, so New Space India Limited has been established for the purpose of technology transfer. So we have just discussed that for the purpose of technology transfer, this New Space India Limited has been established. And even Indian National Space Authorization, Space Promotion and Authorization Center has been established for the purpose of a collaboration, between whom? Collaboration between ISRO and the private space firms. So therefore, don't you think that establishing private space firms would further enrich the collaboration, further strengthen collaboration, and it would make these different private space firms would go for more and more research, more and more innovation, and that would result in more and more cost-effective missions and more satellite launch orders for these space firms, and that would substantially increase Indian space sector contribution in the global space industry. And in fact, commercialization of the technologies that are already developed by the Indian Space Research Organization. So with the commercialization, so ISRO can actually earn crucial foreign direct investment, and apart from that, ISRO can actually focus on crucial missions such as Gaganyaan and developing Indian space station. So we have aimed at Gaganyaan mission in Indian space station. We plan to develop Indian space station by the year 2035, and we also wanted to send humans into the moon, right? So ISRO can actually focus on interplanetary missions. So in order to achieve all these objectives, the existing roles and functions of ISRO when it comes to launching these satellites needs to be outsourced to these private firms, right? So commercialization will also help ISRO in the coming years, and establishing the private space firms would also result in socio-economic development. So for example, how it has resulted in socio-economic development: remote sensing satellites. So remote sensing satellites would be able to regularly map the forest cover, forest fires, and they also have important applications with respect to disaster management and availability of crucial resources, water stress areas. They can observe the green cover also, and they can observe the mineral resources and disaster management, particularly cyclones, droughts. So all those different things would be regularly observed. And communication, internet connectivity. So this is how they actually go for a large scale socio-economic development. So when we talk about large scale socio-economic development, e-healthcare and e-education, right? So telemedicine and tele-education, so these satellites have a crucial applications, right? So therefore, private space firms have a huge role to play when it comes to the socio-economic development of India. So I hope you have understood this. Now we'll try to understand Indian space policy that has been framed and launched in the year 2023, right? So in fact, Indian Space Research Organization has recently unveiled the Indian Space Policy of 2023. So Indian Space Policy of 2023 has been recently unveiled by the Indian Space Research Organization. What is the objective of Indian Space Policy? So there should be a policy, and it gives more and more clarity, right? So if there is a policy, it gives a clarity, and there is a vision, and there is a proper aim that we need to achieve, right? So that's why these policies are actually framed and implemented. And in fact, this policy aimed at growth of the space industry, rapid growth of space industry, rapid growth of the space industry in the sense that, so Indian space industry should contribute around 10% of the global space industry, global space industry. So that is one objective. And apart from that, making India a leader in the global space industry. So these are the objective with which the Indian Space Policy 2023 has been launched by ISRO. Now, what is its vision? So it has a vision, right? So this vision actually guide the Indian Space Policy 2023. And in fact, its vision is fostering a thriving commercial presence, right? A thriving commercial presence. Fostering a thriving commercial presence in space. Commercial presence in space, and that would further empower and nurturing the private sector. So thereby promoting the private sector. Now we have discussed that, we have just discussed why increased private sector participation is very, very important for any country, particularly for a country like India. So therefore, in this context, what is the strategy and vision for Indian space sector 2023, right? So the strategy and vision for Indian space sector 2023 is that creating a conducive and a viable ecosystem for the private entity. So whenever there is a conducive and viable ecosystem for the private entities or the private sector, so they can actually come in and they can also set up their startups. They can establish their startups in the space arena. So that would further enriches the competitiveness, and that would also result in cost effectiveness, more and more research as well. And in fact, nurturing and facilitating new startups in the arena of space, and authorizing the private space activities. Now when I say private space activities, for example, satellite launch, and research in the arena of space, so authorizing the private space activities. For example, for that particular reason, so we have established Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center has been established, and similarly strategizing Indian space sector and promoting industrial and international outreach. So that is also very, very important, because as of now ISRO has been collaborating with a number of countries, particularly the developing countries, and one such example is SARC satellite, and the other example is that, so we have been collaborating with countries like Russia and France and even UK and US with respect to this Gaganyaan mission. So these are the strategy and vision of Indian space sector in the year 2023. And in fact, Indian space policy has created 4 new entities, and these 4 new entities will actually oversee the implementation of the policy. Now what are those 4 new entities and that oversee the implementation of the policy? First is Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center, so that we have just discussed. And this is responsible for this is actually a single window agency. This is considered as a single window agency, between ISRO and private space firms. So therefore it is responsible for regulating and also promoting the commercial space sector in India. And similarly, Indian Space Research Organization ISRO has been established, and it will continue to be the national space agency. So ISRO will be the national space agency, and it will focus on research and development in the space sector. So this is the second agency that has been created for the implementation of Indian space policy. And Indian Space Application Center ISAC has also been created. So it is responsible for developing, it is responsible for what? It is responsible for developing and also applying space technologies for the benefit of Indian people. And Indian Space Education and Research Center ISERC. So this will be responsible for promoting space education and also research in India. So these are the four entities that have been created to oversee the implementation of this policy, right? So apart from that, you can also go through the Indian Space Policy 2023, and we have just discussed about that. So it focuses on the private sector presence. It has created new entities to collaborate between the ISRO and also the private space firms. And in fact, so why private sector presence is very, very important, and how this Indian space policy has envisioned the private sector presence here. For example, making India a global technology powerhouse is one of the objective, and large scale employment opportunities in the technology sector is also another major objective. So to that, skill development is the area where we should work on. And Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center has been created as a level playing field between all these different private space firms, and New Space India Limited has been established to reorient the space activity models from supply driven to the demand driven, right? So ISRO will now focus on more research and developmental activities instead of just launching satellites. And what are the potential benefits of the Space Policy 2023? Because it has a certain benefits, right? So if you look at the benefits of Indian Space Policy 2023, for example, so it would result in increased economic growth. So how it would result in increased economic growth? Because it would result in more and more participation of private space firms in India, and it would attract more and more satellite launch offers from other countries, and it would further enhances the cooperation, and it would create more and more employment opportunities for the Indian youth, and it would result in the skill development of the existing workforce. So therefore it would certainly result in giving a sustained boost to the economy of India, right? Because it is considered as a major contributor to the Indian economy, and it would expected to boost the sector and also create new jobs. And it would certainly have a spin-off effect or multiplier effect on the national security as well, because this policy will help India to develop new space-based technologies for the national security purposes. And enhanced international cooperation. So as of now also, we have been cooperating and collaborating with a number of space agencies outside India in other countries, for example NASA, European space agencies, Japanese space agencies, and UAE based space agency, and Russian space agency. So we have been collaborating with all these different space agencies, but this space policy will further enrich or further enhances India's space collaboration with a number of different space agencies in different parts of the world. And increased access to space-based services, right? So Indian Space Policy 2023 will further make it easier for the Indian businesses, Indian individuals to access space-based services such as communication, navigation, and Earth observation satellites. So it would become more and more cost effective, it would become more and more competitive, and competitiveness within India would result in the global competitiveness, and that would further enriches and strengthens India's overall space economy, right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So few more topics about the space sector we'll be discussing in tomorrow's class, and that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our class, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.